Chapter 1. First Step. Thump. A shooting star flashed through the void, bursting out of chaos into the cosmos and heading straight for a place where life and disorder braided together. The commotion drew attention. An immense gaze settled over it, accompanied by swells of music that rose and fell. The meteor was drawn in, folded into that melody. A new syllable, never heard before, was born on the edge of the grand symphony, strange but fitting, acceptable. The attention withdrew. Whoosh! Achievement unlocked, stepping into Middle-earth. Description: enter Middle-earth. Leeway blinked against a sudden rush of sound, the wind, the whisper of grass, the rustle of leaves, birdsong, and the warmth of sunlight on his face. He opened his eyes fully. The sunlight stabbed at his nerves, and he had to squint. After a few long, blinking moments, he adjusted and looked around. A line of small floating text hovered in front of him. Achievement? The font looked unnervingly familiar. Middle-earth. He sat up, inhaled deeply, and a clean, earthy scent filled his nose. It felt 100 times better than his shabby little room. He was standing beneath a tall oak, the land rolling away in green fields as far as he could see. There was no place like this near his home, no way he had wandered here. Had he been kidnapped? Sleepwalked to another plane? He tried to remember what had happened before waking. His mind was a blank, save for a final image: Minecraft. The famous sandbox game had been with him for half his life. He'd played it for 10 years. Even the endless pixel blocks had never bored him. Then he froze, eyes snapping to the floating text as it began to fade. He focused, and it popped back into view. Isn't that the achievement system from Minecraft? A hint appeared in the upper right of his vision. New player tutorial, open inventory. At the faint mental call, a familiar interface glided open. 3 rows of inventory, a hotbar across the bottom. In the upper left, a slightly dazed, full-body portrait of himself stood next to 4 armor slots. He closed the inventory and noticed new bars on his display: health and hunger. He must have been out for a while. The hunger bar was already half gone. If it dropped to 0, he'd lose HP. Am I transmigrated into a game? Before he could decide whether to punch a tree for wood and make a crafting table, a voice called out. Hey, are you all right? Leeway looked around, startled. There was no one. I'm here, sir. A hand waved in front of him. He looked down and met the gaze of a very small person. Sir, are you all right? Leeway blinked. The stranger reached only to Leeway's waist. He had a mature face, sensible clothes, and a fish tucked into his belt, definitely not a child. At first, Leeway thought dwarf, until he noticed something else. Childlike height, large, hairy feet, slightly pointed ears. He was staring at a hobbit. Hello, Leeway said, trying to sound steady. Human, sir. May I ask if you're lost? The little fellow asked in a worried voice. Human, sir. The address felt odd, but the hobbit's presence eased Leeway a little. This wasn't a deserted wilderness, after all. Yes, I'm lost. Could you tell me where I am? The hobbit blinked. Oh, this is the Shire, to be precise, Hobbiton. The name slammed into Leeway's memory. The Shire, the Lord of the Rings. He stood dumbfounded for a moment, then looked at the hobbit more closely. Big, hairy feet, a round, friendly face, an overall comfortable, homely look. This was really Middle-earth. Excitement warred with a sharp, sensible fear. He loved the movies. Middle-earth looked like a dream, but he wasn't a hero. Ordinary people in those stories didn't always get to live peacefully. Orcs and darker things could come out of nowhere. He tried to keep his expression blank. The hobbit scratched his head. The human looked dazed. Maybe he'd hit his head. If you need a place to stay, there's an inn in the village, he offered. Or to the east is Bree, where more humans live. You might prefer that. Thank you. I understand, Leeway said. At that moment, his stomach gave an audible rumble. The sudden noise made the hobbit and Leeway both glance down awkwardly. The hobbit's eyes lit up. Oh, I was planning to make fried fish and potatoes tonight. Want to come to my house and eat with me? Leeway almost refused out of politeness, but his hunger meter and the fact that starvation meant health loss made the decision easy. I'd be honored. The hobbit looked surprised but relieved. Well then, follow me. I only bought enough for myself, so I'll have to pop back to the market. If you come along, sorry. I mean, if you don't mind. He hustled off, and Leeway shamelessly followed. After a short walk, the round doors and grassy roofs of hobbit holes came into view. Crossing a small bridge, they reached a busy market where hobbits bustled past in every direction. Leeway stuck out among the squat folk. He had to look down constantly. Curious glances tracked him. "Are you a wizard?" a wide-eyed youngster asked, running up to stare, probably thinking of Gandalf. "No, I'm not," Leeway said with a wave. The child was hurried away by a parent before Leeway could add anything. The hobbit who had invited him finished bagging his groceries and led Leeway out of the crowded market. Leeway exhaled, glad to stop being the center of attention. They reached a neatly kept hobbit hole, and the little fellow swung the round door wide. "This is my home, sir," he said, stepping aside. "The ceiling might be a bit low for you humans, but come in. It's a bit early for dinner, but tea time is soon. We can have something small first." Leeway ducked to enter and closed the door behind him. The interior was cozy, low ceilings, warm light, shelves of jars and plates. The layout felt oddly familiar. His eyes were drawn to a small wooden chest by the door. He cleared his throat. "By the way, my name's Leeway. I didn't catch yours." The hobbit had just set the groceries on the table and turned. He straightened up and spoke with a touch of pride. "Oh, hello, Leeway. I am Baggins. Bilbo Baggins," he added more warmly. Chapter 2. Synthetic Table-Level Cooking Skills. Baggins? Bilbo Baggins? Leeway froze. What are the odds? Of course, the wooden chest. That was the dowry chest. Case closed. Hiss. Leeway stared at the hobbit. Poor Bilbo had no idea what his home was about to endure, nor did he know that his mother's dowry chest would one day be used by a certain dwarf to wipe his feet. A mischievous grin popped up on Leeway's face. He stepped to the doorway, bowed, and said, "Leeway, at your service." Startled, Bilbo blinked for a moment, then straightened his jacket out of habit and replied, "Bilbo Baggins, at your service." Having completed the formalities, Leeway stepped into the warm, snug hobbit hole. If hobbits had a common trait, it was a fondness for keeping plenty of provisions, and Bilbo's larder proved it. Piles of food and drink were stacked well into the house, enough to feed 13 dwarves without blinking. "You can sit anywhere you like," Bilbo said cheerfully. "Afternoon tea's at 4, though I don't mind if we eat early. What do you like? Fried sausages and bread." Hobbit hospitality was no empty phrase. Despite Leeway's unexpected arrival, Bilbo welcomed him as though they were old friends. "Anything's fine. I'm your guest. I'll follow your lead," Leeway said. "Follow my lead? All right then." Bilbo scratched his head, fetched a string of sausages from the pantry and a plate of bread stacked like a small mountain. He sliced the sausages and set them beside a well-worn frying pan on the little hobbit stove. The countertop was low, built for hobbit heights, and the pan looked as if it had been in the family for generations. "Interested in cooking?" Bilbo asked from behind. Leeway moved aside to let Bilbo approach the hot pan. "This pan's been in my family forever," Bilbo said proudly. "Good pan." Sizzle, the sausages hit the pan, little drops of fat popping. After a few quiet seconds, sensing the silence was getting awkward, Bilbo planted his hands on his hips and said, "I can cook all sorts. Fry, roast, boil. I learned from my mother." He flipped the sausages. The exposed side was already golden and sent up a tempting, meaty aroma. Leeway's stomach betrayed him with an embarrassing rumble. He swallowed hard. Bilbo put the cooked sausages on a plate and dusted them with a little pepper. No sooner had Leeway been about to ask for one than a prompt appeared in his vision. Function unlock table. Learned recipe. Fried sausage. You can view what you can craft at any time. The crafting table updates dynamically based on items you encounter. What? The crafting table? The plate slid into front of Leeway just then. "I guess you've been hungry a long time," Bilbo said, setting it down with obvious pride. "Thank you," Leeway managed, feeling unexpectedly moved. He ate quickly, faster than Bilbo could return to the stove. The meal recovered 2 hunger bars out of 10. "Bilbo," he said between mouthfuls, "may I try cooking? May I try?" Bilbo blinked. He hadn't been expecting that. "Oh, of course. Go ahead." Bilbo stepped back and Leeway moved to the pan. As he wrapped his fingers around the handle, another tutorial box popped up. Cooking steps, select recipe, prepare ingredients, lock tools, start cooking. Cooking, in normal terms, takes skill, careful timing, the right heat, precise seasoning. For Leeway, though, the system made it procedural. Just follow the steps. He slid the sausages into the pan. He stood perfectly still in front of it, not a twitch as steam rose. When the edges looked ready, his hand moved almost by itself. The pan flipped, and the sausages turned over with a clean, practiced arc. Bilbo's eyes widened. Is he a professional? Not sure. Let's see more. Swish! Another flip, and a glossy, steaming sausage slid onto the plate, its surface evenly browned. Li pinched together a speck of salt, ground it fine between his fingers, and scattered it evenly. The heat drew the salt in, marrying with the meat. A small, deliberate touch, but it changed everything. Sorry to keep you waiting, Li said, carrying the plate back to Bilbo. Bilbo stabbed at a sausage with his fork and cut it open. A soft puff of steam escaped. The inside was cooked through just right. He took a bite, and his eyes immediately watered from the heat, but he held on, closing his eyes to savor the flavor. The meat, the seasoning, the delicate salt, each element balanced perfectly. Bilbo sat up a little straighter, nearly pushing his chair back. "Mr. Li," he blurted, face lighting up with astonishment. "I swear that is the best fried sausage I have ever eaten in my life." "You flatter me," Li said, a touch puzzled by Bilbo's exuberance. To him this felt like a formula, system-guided cooking, but taste, it turned out, still held surprises. "No, truly," Bilbo insisted. "I've eaten these sausages my whole life, but today, it's like I'm tasting them for the first time. They're delicious." Li raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the depth of Bilbo's reaction. He fried a few more sausages, plated them, and took another bite himself. The expression on his face betrayed him. His smile twitched, then widened. "Holy cow, these are amazing. Can I really make this?" He set down his knife and fork, nodding to Bilbo. Inside, Li was grinning. If the crafting table could produce results like this, cooking might be a lot more interesting than he had first thought. Chapter 3. If you want to get rich, plant trees first. That afternoon, Bilbo hurried to his larder and came back with a long string of sausages in various flavors. As a Shire native, he declared it was his duty to entertain a friend who had come so far. Li, of course, didn't refuse. The two of them enjoyed a lavish afternoon tea. While savoring the food Bilbo had prepared, Li's mind wandered. He had watched The Lord of the Rings many times and knew the broad strokes of the story, but being here in person left him ignorant of many details outside the key, prophetic scenes. He needed time to adjust and to collect information. After the meal, they declined Bilbo's exclusive Shire tobacco and sat in the small courtyard, idly staring into the distance. For a while, the air was quiet. "Li, do you have anything urgent to take care of in the next few days?" Bilbo asked suddenly. Li raised an eyebrow. Bilbo stood up, took a breath, and hurried on. "Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to pry. What I mean is, if you don't have anything pressing, perhaps you could stay a few more days. You see, the Shire is pleasant, isn't it? You could walk a bit and rest." "We hobbits aren't fond of leaving home or of adventures," Bilbo added quickly, "but I'm curious about the wider world myself. If you'd be willing, you might tell me about it, and I'll fulfill my duties as host, entertain you, show you around, whatever you'd like." He put his hands on his hips and blinked, waiting for an answer. In his imagination, Li had become a traveling master chef, perhaps even an imperial royal cook. Every bite made with such skill would be a treasure. Li saw through the gentle scheme immediately. Skilled people are welcomed wherever they go. Bilbo looked a little uneasy. He hadn't invited a stranger to stay before and was nervous. Just as Bilbo was about to add more, Li laughed. "All right, if you insist, I'll shamelessly impose for a few more days." "Wonderful, wonderful." Bilbo clapped and beamed. Only after Li stood up to return inside did Bilbo breathe out. The afternoon passed quickly. The minutes between tea and dinner slipped by in conversation. That evening, under the pretense of learning, Li picked up a few more recipes. Naturally, he ate everything Bilbo produced, while Bilbo received the refined, almost system-level dishes Li prepared. Bilbo felt a little guilty, eating such high-quality food while offering up his own crude cooking. A great chef eating a burnt fish from a novice's pan would surely be in pain, Bilbo thought. Both of them were satisfied at the end of the meal. A hobbit's appetite could hold a lot, and by Li's usual standards, this would have been food for a whole day. Li had wondered if the game mechanic would apply. In Minecraft, once your hunger bar is full, you can't eat anymore. To his surprise, after his visible hunger filled, he could keep eating. Extra food piled on and created a second, brighter hunger bar above the original, hunger storage. Li Wei guessed the obvious. Middle-earth itself was behaving like a mod, much like many Minecraft mods. After testing, he discovered the extra bar could only be filled once. After that, no more food-produced changes, and he was truly full. After thanking Bilbo, Li Wei slipped away into a distant copse. He'd wanted to do this for a while. He checked his surroundings to make sure no one would disturb him, then planted his feet and struck the big tree in front of him with a hard punch. Thud. A muffled crack appeared in the trunk, and his hand was fine. Thump, 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 thump. The muffled sounds continued. After several solid blows, the tree splintered with a loud snap, leaning over and crashing to the ground, scattering birds and small beasts. A tiny chunk of wood floated down and hovered before sinking into his backpack. A label appeared, oak log. Unlike the game's uniform blocks, the pieces broken from the tree still kept their unique shapes. When Li Wei tried to break off another section, the second log occupied a separate slot. Different pieces couldn't stack. Then a notification popped up in his mind. Crafting recipe unlocked. Standard oak. The fallen tree on the ground disappeared a moment later, replaced in his backpack by several neatly stacked standard oak logs, plus a pile of sticks and leaves. Achievement unlocked. Standardization. Li Wei watched the achievement message and smiled. Of course, the real world's pieces are all unique, like snowflakes, so they can't be stacked. With a quick crafting step, the raw pieces could be standardized into uniform materials that stack neatly in inventory. Using the small 4-slot crafting grid in his backpack, he converted the logs into recognizable, stackable items. With the process understood, Li Wei set to work in earnest, chopping and gathering. As more materials filled his pack, other crafting recipes unlocked. A crafting table, then a wooden pickaxe. He tapped the soil with his foot and began the old-fashioned way of mining, digging straight down. When he surfaced much later, his backpack held a full set of stone tools, and he'd earned the Stone Age achievement. He'd also fashioned a few furnaces and burned some charcoal for torches. Ore wasn't as easy to find as in the game, so he had to improvise. After a small chime, his level ticked to 1. Nothing dramatic happened. If he found diamonds and obsidian later, he could try to craft an enchanting table and see what that did. By then it was late. He looked up. The sky was crowded with stars, and a slender crescent moon hung among them. The view made him sigh. So beautiful. It was almost time to return. Bilbo would be waiting for a midnight snack. Chapter 4. Departure. That night, Bilbo felt a little restless. "I'll tidy up the room a bit so you can sleep more comfortably," he said. "There's an empty room inside." "I'll help." Li Wei followed him without hesitation. While they bent over to straighten things, Li Wei finally asked the question that had been nagging him. "What year is it now?" "Now. It's night, of course. Most people are asleep at this hour." Bilbo answered as he picked up an awkward little box. Li Wei took it and set it outside the door, keeping his hands busy. He pressed on. "No, I mean, what year is it? What date?" "Oh, this year. It's 1340, May. 1340. The number hit Li Wei like a physical blow. He banged his head on the eaves in sheer clumsiness. His health bar flickered, but no damage was taken. 1340 by the Shire calendar. That was 2940 of the Third Age. When had the dwarves set out for the Lonely Mountain? Late April of 1341. So this was a full year before the Lonely Mountain expedition. Gandalf would still be traveling, Thorin still unsettled and wandering. Dwarves, elves, men, orcs, wargs, a terrible dragon, a great mountain of gold. Thorin, Dol Guldur, war, the One Ring, a rush of names and images flooded Li Wei's mind, and for a moment everything blackened at the edges of his vision. "Are you all right, Li Wei?" Bilbo asked. Li Wei blinked, forcing himself back from the spiral of thought. "Oh, nothing. I'm fine. I just bumped my head." "You must be considered tall among humans then," Bilbo teased. "Of course, I'm 1.85 meters. Li Wei puffed out his chest instinctively. Thump. His health bar jumped, and he doubled over, making Bilbo laugh outright. Li Wei swatted his head and shook it. What could he do in a single year? Peaceful days have a way of passing quickly. A few days later, after a late-night snack, Li Wei sat on a little chair in the garden with a blade of grass between his teeth, staring at a single star that seemed unusually bright. If an ordinary person were dropped into Middle-earth without any advantages, even with intimate knowledge of the story of the rings, a year would be a narrow time to change anything fundamental. Even figuring out where to go or how to survive could be a struggle. Li Wei, however, had other resources. Li Wei, it's late. Aren't you going to bed? Bilbo called, opening the kitchen door. Soon. I want to watch the stars a while longer. All right, but remember to lock the door. Bilbo went back inside. Li Wei yawned, glanced at his full health bar and brimming hunger stat, then sprang up, turned, and took a careful look around the comfortable hobbit hole. Living like this wasn't bad at all, so long as nothing tore it apart. He moved to the next thought as the sky lightened. At dawn, there was a rustling at the front of the hole. Bilbo, still drowsy, threw off his covers and poked his head out. Li Wei, fully dressed and standing at the door, Li Wei turned to him. I'm going. Going out? The road won't wait, Mr. Baggins. He bowed slightly. Thank you for your hospitality. Let me repay you next time we meet. Bilbo's face brightened and then grew serious. Won't you stay a few more days? I haven't shown you half the things I could. Li Wei smiled and shook his head. Bilbo's unfinished words hung between them. Goodbyes happen all over this land, but I think we'll meet again soon, Mr. Baggins. I'm setting off on an adventure. The words stirred something in Bilbo, then it passed. Wait a moment, he said, rushing inside. He returned with a bundle and pressed it into Li Wei's hands. Take this. This is food. You'll need it. Travelers must have provisions. Li Wei was touched. He squatted, patted Bilbo's shoulder, and said quietly, Thank you, my friend. They had only known one another a few days, but the time had been pleasant. Li Wei had cooked, told stories, and the pair had become good companions. Promise you'll come back, Bilbo said. I will. Li Wei grinned. They parted without much ceremony. A brief wave, nothing dramatic, and followed their separate roads. Before he left, Li Wei asked Bilbo for a map. Knowing the geography in theory was different from actually traveling it, and a map would make everything safer. From the Shire, all the old routes fanned out. To the north lay the ruins of Arnor and the Angmar Heights. To the west were Lindon and the Blue Mountains. East, past the Brandywine, lay Bree and then the wide, lonely lands further east, where rangers sometimes walked, keeping watch against darker things. To the south between Brandywine and Bree were the Old Forest and the Barrow Downs, both empty of friendly folk and full of strange rumors. Best avoided. Li Wei thought like a player in a game who needed a secure base before building anything grand. After considering many places, he fixed on one, a broad, sparsely populated area east of Bree, in the region often called the Lone Lands. It was remote, few lived there, and in the future, both the company heading to the Lonely Mountain and the Ring-Bearer's Path would cross that way. If he were to be part of those events, a base there would be convenient. He folded the map back up and set his direction. From dawn to dusk, he ran along the main road, heading east without stopping. He had already discovered that with enough food, his stamina was effectively limitless. He wouldn't tire, though his rations burned away fast. The parcel Bilbo had given, enough for a hobbit to last a week, was gone from Li Wei's pack in less than half a day. That was the price for his pace, but the speed was worth it. By nightfall, he had crossed several Shire villages, passed the Brandywine, and reached the edge of the Old Forest and the Barrow Downs. He moved like a streak across the countryside. As darkness fell and the stars came out, Li Wei found a dried tree stump by the roadside and pulled out his stone axe. Thump, thump. The old trunk snapped at the base and toppled with a loud crash that echoed in the quiet. He hacked the fallen log into kindling and soon had a modest bonfire going. He took out the food Bilbo had given and, with a pair of skewers, began roasting a few sausages. While the meat cooked, Li Wei thought about tools and armor. Shields and metal armor were what would protect him best. But they required one thing he didn't have: iron. He tossed a few more sticks into the fire to keep it alive. If a passing farmer had seen him conjuring extra wooden branches out of thin air, he'd have thought Li Wei a wizard. He picked up his stone sword and examined it. A small line of description shimmered in his mind. Stone sword, attack 5. The blade looked like it had been carved by an expert hand. Smooth, razor-sharp, and unexpectedly sturdy, almost like metal. It was a beautiful, well-made weapon, like something a collector might want. The craftsmanship never ceased to impress him. The fire behind him popped. Li Wei realized his sausages were almost done, but as he reached for them, the flames dimmed alarmingly fast. These sticks burned weirdly. He shoved a couple more branches into the blaze, and then his hand hit something with a dull thump. His heart skipped. He looked up, and out of the shadows, a dried, mummified head was staring down at him. Gray, cracked skin, eyes glowing a dull red beneath a layer of parched scalp. It emerged slowly from the gloom, fixed on him. Chapter 5, White Slayer. The firelight trembled across a tall, thin shadow. When Li Wei glanced up, a cold wave ran from his feet to his scalp. His skin prickled. Before he could recover, the grotesquely dried corpse gave a shriek and lunged. The scream, so close, nearly froze his blood. Summoning every scrap of courage, Li Wei tore himself free from the paralysis, rolled to the side with a thud, and looked back. The workbench behind him had been utterly smashed by the creature. What strength! In the wan light, he finally saw it clearly. Ragged robes, a gaunt, shadowy frame, eyes glowing faintly, ancient jewelry clinking on its person. In his current location, the word popped into his head like a punch. Barrow White. I avoided the ancient tomb in the old forest. How did I run into one here? Stay away. His throat tightened. Breathing came in ragged gasps. The tall shadow uttered a rasping laugh, like bellows with cracked reeds. It had smelled a sweet scent. Fear. The feeling dropped over Li Wei like a web, pinning him in place. The Barrow White seemed delighted. Humiliated, Li Wei tightened his grip on the stone sword. How could I, a respectable Minecraft player, be reduced to this? Today, no matter what, I have to take it down. The White raised a gaunt arm. A rusted burial sword slid free. Tetanus enchantment, it seemed, and came down. Ah! Li Wei roared, clambering up and swinging with everything he had. Clang. The blade struck like iron. If his was an ordinary stone sword, it would have shattered. Attack effective. A line of text floated across his vision. The Barrow White staggered, thrown off by the unexpected resistance. It stared at Li Wei, then at the gash in its own body, incredulous that a mere stone blade had pierced its sorcerous protection and corroded armor. What kind of stone is your sword made of? The thing hissed. A label appeared above the corpse's head. 60 health points. That was 3 times his own. Li Wei compared in his head. He had 20 health. An average adult hobbit had 15 to 18. How on earth had Arnor dealt with these things? A small green number popped up by the Barrow White. No. There was no time to think. With a rush of motion, the ancient longsword met his stone blade. Li Wei felt a numb jolt down his arm. The White hit with brutal force, and it regenerated fast. Humph! Li Wei forced the parry. The system-made stone sword in his hand was stronger than it looked. He swung again. Another small tear opened in the White's flesh. 4. Good. It's slow, but as long as I keep hitting, a gust sliced past his ear. The White's other hand lashed across him and caught his kidney, sending him flying. For a moment, Li Wei blacked out. When he came to, he lay on the ground. His waist throbbed. The burial rings on the White's hand had acted like brass knuckles. The metallic sting was unmistakable. Then, as his hunger bar dropped, the wound knit itself. In just 2 seconds, his injury healed. Seeing another strike coming, Li Wei scrambled up and blocked the sword. In that short stretch of time, his health had fully recovered. The pain in his waist felt like a distant memory. The cost had been a little over half of his stored second-row hunger. He drew a breath. If he counted his food reserves, he actually had 60 health too. In that case, what was there to fear? Come on, duel. Their swordplay was crude but even. Li Wei had no formal training. The Barrow White's movements were distorted by its dead limbs. They traded heavy blows, clatter, grunt, swing. The White showed Myth 3, 3, occasionally 4 or 5. Under constant forced knockback and real damage, it staggered back 2 steps, but it had weathered worse. A stone sword bypassing its defenses and buffing damage, it had seen similar tricks from the Dunedain. Swish, soon the White's blade found him. In panic, Li Wei dodged the vitals but still took a deep gash. 6 points would have healed immediately, he thought, but then his heart lurched. He stared at his status bar. The red heart representing his HP cracked, its color darkened. Wither? No, this is... Barrow Whites are servants of darkness. their very existence carries a malignancy. Li Wei felt the urge to retreat. Fighting an enemy with superior attributes and an ongoing damage curse was brutal. How had he overcome stat check monsters in games before? Move, use terrain, beat stats with tactics and traits. Thud. Another blow came. Li Wei rolled and kicked up a handful of dirt. Eat dirt, old geezer. In a game he might have fancy footwork on keyboards and mice. This was reality and his first real fight. Just suppressing his fear and managing to counterattack had taken nearly everything. He could only rely on traits. Li Wei forced himself up. He'd rolled and scrambled for several seconds. His health had already fully recovered, though his first-row hunger was now empty. Ugly thing, look at me. The taunt worked instantly. The Barrow-Wight's eyes flared brighter, and it lunged in fury. It was within a meter when the sword came down. Li Wei gritted his teeth, and in that instant raised his hand. Pop. A raw stone block, the exact dimensions of a meter by a meter by a meter, appeared upright directly in the Wight's path. The creature stumbled on impact. Li Wei capitalized on the chance, hammering repeatedly. The Barrow-Wight lost its footing and fell. Nos 3. Roar! As if sensing its life force draining, the Barrow-Wight erupted, desperately scrambling over the block. Li Wei stepped back and produced another stone with his other hand, halting it again. The Wight raged. Normally, it could power through a lone block, but this conjured stone felt different. Its force wouldn't penetrate. Thud! A figure descended from above, an axe cleaving into the Barrow-Wight's forehead. The jumping axe strike took off 10 health points. Having landed that hit, Li Wei switched back to his stone sword and began hacking rapidly. Mull 4. At last, the Barrow-Wight lashed back and drew its ancient blade. Swish! A sword pierced Li Wei's chest. He ignored the pain, seizing the ancient sword and pinning it against his torso. Greedy for victory, he kept swinging. Bang! Ah! When the final strike landed, a piercing shriek split the night. Black mist billowed from the Wight's body, exploded, and dispersed into the air. The dried corpse slumped to the ground, eyes going dull. Achievement unlocked, Monster Hunter. Condition, defeat a hostile creature. Special achievement unlocked, Barrow-Wight Slayer. Condition, defeat one Barrow-Wight, Parrow-Wight. Title unlocked, Barrow-Wight Slayer. Chapter 6, Prancing Horse Inn. Taking a short breather, Li Wei casually picked up the roasted sausage from the bonfire. It was perfectly cooked. After a few bites, his HP was fully restored. His fractured bones reknit improbably fast, his wounds closed, and the pallor in his face warmed back to color. He felt completely relaxed. It was then he noticed a new interface, the title system. Only one title sat there, lonely, Ghoul Slayer. When he highlighted it, an option appeared, Equip. A description read, after equipping a title, certain notable individuals and those with keen intuition may recognize your deeds upon observation, and your related reputation spreads more quickly. So it was just a title, no stat bonuses. That was fine. He clicked Equip and glanced at the ghoul's corpse nearby. Once the lingering malignant aura dissipated, it was only a twisted, desiccated body, certainly elite enough to drop loot. Li Wei flipped it over. Under the moonlight, many small items glittered. The corpse had been buried with jewelry and ornaments from a wealthy household. Evil has been banished. Rest in peace, he murmured, and collected the trinkets without a second thought. This was his first real haul in Middle-earth. The pieces looked intact and would fetch a good price. He packed them away to expose to sunlight later to dispel any lingering curse, an old trick he'd learned from the source material. Nearby lay an old sword. When he picked it up, a line of description appeared. Ancient tomb old sword, attack +4. Nothing else. He frowned. An elite ghoul's weapon should be better than a wooden sword. When the ghoul had wielded it earlier, it had seemed stronger and carried a withering effect. Clearly, the weapon had been weakened by whatever corrupting influence the ghoul had, stripped of its curse when the ghoul was banished. Disappointed but pragmatic, Li Wei put the solid metal sword into his pack as a keepsake. He had plenty of inventory space anyway. Satisfied with his spoils, he doused the bonfire and set off by moonlight. Ghouls roamed the roads. This was not a place to linger. Maybe his chopping or the fire had drawn one from nearby. Either way, he kept moving. He ran through the night, sun and moon passing overhead. Only as dusk spread across the sky did he slow, climbing a small rise and looking out ahead. On the horizon lay a small town he'd never seen, but the name sprang to mind immediately. Bree. Finally, his spirits brightened at the sight of other people. Before entering, he unpacked the jewelry and laid it in the sun. Wisps of black vapor rose from the pieces and faded. The dull metal regained its shine. The curse was gone. He packed everything away and moved toward the town gate. It wasn't until his usual late-morning mealtime that he reached the gate and was hailed by the guards, the first humans he had seen in this world. "Who are you?" one asked. "Just an ordinary adventurer," Li Wei replied. "An adventurer?" The guard peered at him through the small window, eyeing his clothes carefully. "Strange attire, but we don't refuse adventurers here." The window closed and the guard went away. Moments later, the gate swung open. "Come in, esteemed adventurer." Li Wei walked through and casually noted the guard's HP readout, 20, the same as his. A plain human. He asked for directions. "By the way, where is the Prancing Horse Inn? I heard it's well run." "Straight ahead," the guard said, pointing. He didn't have far to go. Soon a building with a carved wooden sign came into view. A horse caught mid-leap. The Prancing Horse Inn, run for generations by the Butterbur family. Business looked good. Even late morning, the place bustled. Ignoring curious stares, Li Wei went straight to the bar. "Hello, friend. What can I get for you?" the bartender asked. "I need a room and some food," Li Wei said, glancing at his odd clothes. "If possible, could you also prepare a change of clothes for me?" The bartender hesitated. Providing clothes wasn't usual in practice, but something about Li Wei's demeanor suggested he'd been through something, and he didn't want to refuse. "It's possible, depending on what you can pay. This isn't normally part of our services." A dull, ancient coin landed on the counter with a crisp clink, drawing several looks. "Will this do?" Li Wei asked. The bartender picked it up and held it to the light, eyes widening. "I can't appraise it. Please wait. I'll fetch the owner." A middle-aged man hurried over. He glanced at Li Wei and then at the coin, murmuring, "Beautiful, truly beautiful." Although only silver, the coin was old and the workmanship rare. "Are you sure you want to give this to me?" "Yes." "Excellent." The owner smiled. "The finest guest room, the best food and drink, and clothes made from Bree's finest fabrics. I'll see that everything is top quality. Rest here a bit while I prepare." He took a few measurements and asked Li Wei about his style preferences, then left to arrange things. The bartender brought a large platter piled with roasted meat, stew, fresh fruit, and a frothing glass of the Prancing Horse's house beer. The malt aroma was clear and rich. After devouring the meal, Li Wei's hunger meters were filled to the max. The beer gave him a temporary, drunken buff, lightheadedness for a few dozen seconds. Using that brief, tipsy haze to his advantage, he went to his room, closed the door, and lay on the strange but soft bed. Even though food kept exhaustion at bay and his spirit felt intact, he indulged the human habit of resting for a while. He hadn't been lying there long when a soft knock sounded. "Who is it?" he called. "Bartender, sir. I've brought your clothes." Li Wei opened the door. The bartender handed over a folded set. "Please try them on. If they don't fit, we'll get another set for you." He left, and Li Wei shut the door. A moment later, he stood in the doorway in his new clothes, looking at himself in a small mirror. Apart from his slightly softer features and jet black hair, he could pass for a local. It fit perfectly. Truly authentic. Chapter 7. Recycling. In a world defined by war, it was impossible to go adventuring without decent equipment. Li Wei stood outside the blacksmith's shop and watched a burly man hammer a strip of iron, the ring of metal on metal filling the room. Only when the hammering stopped and the blacksmith took a break did Li Wei step in. "Hello," he said. "Hello. What can I do for you, customer?" the blacksmith asked. "Do you sell weapons or armor here?" The blacksmith looked up and studied him. "May I ask who you are?" "An adventurer." "So you're not from Bree?" the smith guessed. "No." Li Wei tried to handle it casually. "I won't shortchange you. Name your price." The blacksmith's expression hardened. "No amount will do. Weapons and armor in Bree are reserved for Bree folk. Even among them, not everyone can buy them. If you absolutely need something for self-defense, try the farm next door. They might sell a hoe." Li Wei paused, then realized this wasn't a game where any general store stocked full sets of gear. In this world, weapons and armor were strategic resources, not freely traded commodities, especially not to an unknown adventurer. He switched tactics. Then could you sell me some iron ore? Just a little for research. The blacksmith hesitated. How much do you need? Li Wei gestured vaguely. Not much. The blacksmith shook his head. The situation grew awkward. If he could get ore, Li Wei could try to synthesize equipment himself. In games, ore was easy to mine. In reality, it wasn't lying around. Before they could talk further, a man with a full beard and unkempt hair suddenly stood up from a crouch, smiling at Li Wei. You are? Li Wei started. Get out, you stinking junk collector. Stay away from my shop, the blacksmith snapped, slamming his hammer into the forge and ordering him off the premises. The man didn't get angry at the insult. He grinned. All right, friend. I was just passing by. I might be able to help where he can't. The blacksmith cut him off. Don't be glib in my shop. Behave yourself and don't break Bree's laws. Of course, the man said smoothly. I always respect local rules. He took a step back when the smith counted down, and with a final glare, the blacksmith dismissed him. Li Wei looked at the man, then at the blacksmith, and decided to follow the stranger out. From the doorway, the smith watched them go and finally called after them, I advise you to be careful, sir adventurer. Li Wei nodded. When they were away from prying eyes, he asked, What should I call you? William, the man said. William, the fractional merchant. You can just call me William, sir. Fractional merchant, Li Wei thought the term odd. What do you do? William shrugged. Local merchants call us ragged traveling merchants who steal their business. We sell everything, buy everything, go everywhere. We? Li Wei's thought trailed off, but William kept talking. I won't deny I collect junk, but among my junk, there's often something useful. You know what I need? Li Wei asked. Of course, weapons and armor for self-defense, right? William said confidently. Follow me. His assurance was infectious. Bree was small and mixed. Maybe William really had something. They walked to a quieter part of town. The lane they entered felt older, neglected. Eaves and walls were draped with cobwebs and vines. Houses showed signs of life, but the whole area had an eerie air. A sagging door opened and a burly, unshaven man peered out. He glanced once at William, then followed Li Wei with his gaze until they reached the end of the lane, whereupon the door slammed shut. These are the weapons and armor? Li Wei asked, frowning at William. Do you think I'm easy to fool? William shot back. Do you think I'm low enough to cheat you? Li Wei pointed at a pile in the courtyard. Rusted, broken swords, shattered knives, dented pieces of armor, almost unrecognizable. This is what you call weapons? William spread his hands. You have to understand, I'm law-abiding. Weapons and armor are controlled items in Bree and the surrounding kingdoms. Anyone selling them privately gets into serious trouble. I got these with great effort. In this area, I'm the only one with the connections. You won't find these anywhere else. He picked up a decayed longsword, its metal pitted and flaky, and waved it in front of Li Wei. This has its flaws, sure, but it's still usable for self-defense. Anyone struck by it will bleed, and the wound won't heal without proper care. Li Wei took the sword. The instant his fingers touched the hilt, an attribute popped up before his eyes. Decaying longsword, attack 1. He tried to swing it. A piece crumbled off and fell to the ground. The blade was practically a ruin. It would likely break before it could do any real damage. A stick from the roadside would be more reliable. He glanced around and guessed everything in the courtyard was of similar quality. No wonder Bree turned a blind eye to this place. Li Wei was about to toss the broken sword aside with a snort when a system prompt stopped him cold. New synthesis entry unlocked. Description: higher utilization rate. Input: decaying longsword. Estimated output: 50%, 80% raw materials. The rusted scrap in his hand suddenly looked far more appealing. He did not let his joy show. These things of yours, I'd get more use out of a stick I found on the road. Li Wei stared at the pile of junk on the ground, his face unreadable. William was momentarily taken aback, then casually picked up a sword, swung it a few times, and said, Oh, my lord, at least some of them are useful, right? Li Wei's eyes flicked with mild surprise, not at William's boldness, but at how practiced his sword swings looked. The man actually had some skill. You'll definitely find them useful. Are you so sure? A peddler's instinct, my lord, William said with a sycophantic grin. Li Wei thought, interesting. This world really does have unusual people. Not only the 5 wizards, there are other capable individuals scattered about. At that moment, William's vision blurred for a second, and he watched a small, exquisitely antique piece of jewelry appear in Li Wei's hand, as if pulled from the pile of trinkets. It was the smallest of the gems among the junk. "I don't have much coin on me. How about I pay with this?" Li Wei offered. William's eyes narrowed. The piece felt strangely significant. "You're selling it to me, my lord? That should be enough for all this equipment." He took the jewelry carefully, turned it over in his palm, and his pupils went tight. This wasn't just a pretty bauble. It was an antique, rare, and hard to find. Someone important would pay well for it. Profit, then. Still, something nagged at him. The style, if he wasn't mistaken. William looked at Li Wei more closely and felt a chill. An aura seemed to cling to the man. He had killed those things. That trinket was plundered from a ghoul, an elite ghoul. That was not something an ordinary person could handle easily, and Li Wei showed no sign of poisoning or curse. Dealing with ghouls must be no great hardship for him. William's smile froze. He'd met someone not to be taken lightly. Li Wei, ignoring William's inner reaction, had already decided the little jewel was worth exchanging for the pile of gear. "Pack these up for me," he ordered. Bundling miscellaneous items together counted them as a single item and saved space. William, still a little dazed, nodded and fetched a rope, sorting and tying the junk into bundles. After a while, Li Wei inspected the line of bundled packages in his pack and nodded in satisfaction. William wasn't curious where the junk would end up. A man who could kill constructs like ghouls probably had his own strange ways of doing things. Li Wei planned to leave at once and find a place to synthesize a smelting furnace. To craft one required an iron ingot, which he didn't have yet, but that wasn't a problem. He could use a furnace to smelt junk into iron, then use that iron to synthesize the smelting furnace itself. Smelting in a basic furnace was wasteful. Throwing in an iron sword might only yield an iron nugget, but a smelting furnace could produce iron ingots outright. He had intended to force the issue by burning a mountain of junk, but now he'd unlocked the smelting furnace by chance. A pleasant surprise. As Li Wei was about to leave, William called after him. "Please wait a moment, my lord." He stepped forward and produced a long, cloth-wrapped object from his waist. "This is for you." Li Wei unwrapped it and immediately grew interested. An iron dagger lay inside, compact and well-made. Iron dagger, attack +3, attack speed 50, special attribute, sharpness, attack power +1, synthesis recipe unlocked. "How much?" Li Wei asked, already planning to purchase it. "It's free," William said, face earnest. "Consider it a token of friendship." "Oh," Li Wei's tone was amused. "You want to be friends?" "Yeah," William said simply. Li Wei accepted the dagger. He wasn't handing out friendship cheaply. In the future, he might lend a hand if the opportunity arose, but for now the gift was acceptable. William smiled. A peddler might not have much money, but he had an eye for value. It didn't hurt to know a fellow like that. He didn't stay in Bree long. After returning to the inn to replenish his supplies, Li Wei headed east. Dressed in plain cloth and without obvious weapons, he slipped through the east gate. No sooner had he stepped out than several bearded, scruffy men gathered in the alley by the gate. They exchanged glances, an easy mark. A hand landed on one of the men's shoulders. The big man turned toward the shadow where the hand came from. "William, what, are you joining us?" "No," William said, stepping into the dim. "I'm just here to tell you, you'd best not lay a hand on him. He isn't ordinary." The men hesitated. Old rogues survive by reading signs. They understood the warning. They dispersed and melted away. Peddlers rarely earned goodwill. They were dodgy, okay to avoid. Outside Bree, Li Wei found a quiet spot, set up his workbench and furnace, and began smelting junk. Patiently, he turned the miscellany into 9 iron nuggets and combined them into an iron ingot. With that, he synthesized a smelting furnace. Once he had a proper furnace and charcoal, he fed in bundles of junk. The first piece of armor he smelted produced 3 iron ingots straight away. Li Wei grinned. He wouldn't be short of iron anymore. He made 3 more smelting furnaces and, by the end of half a day, had processed all the bundled junk from his pack. 13 iron blocks sat in his belongings, and he felt thoroughly satisfied. He crafted a full set of iron armor, a set of iron tools, and a wooden shield. He also unlocked a dagger recipe. One wooden stick plus one iron ingot made an iron dagger. The new dagger matched the earlier dagger in stats, 3 attack power and plus 50% attack speed, though this time it lacked the sharpness attribute. That wasn't a deal breaker. If he could make an enchanting table later, a sharpness 5 enchantment would be even better. He did wonder whether enchantments and special attributes stacked. That would be something to study. Putting on the iron set felt surprisingly light. It was a little weighty, but didn't hinder his movement. Achievement geared up, unlocked. The iron armor itself was a sleek, silvery white, smooth, and better looking than the blocky pictures from games. The iron sword was slender, sturdy, and sharp, cast from the same mold as his stone and wooden swords. He carried the wooden shield in his left hand for now, but would usually leave it packed. Armor and weapons synthesized at the workbench could be equipped instantly when needed. After tidying his camp, Li Wei continued his journey. A day later, he left the Forgotten Inn, the last settlement at the edge of the wilds, and paused at the border of civilization. Looking back at Bree, a quiet emotion tugged at him. From here on out, the road would be wilderness, long stretches with no friendly faces, and the occasional ill-intentioned one. He felt conspicuous. "Come out," Li Wei called. Silence answered. A prickle of irritation ran over him. He'd noticed someone watching him since the market, eyes that followed him all the way to the inn. He'd assumed curiosity at first, the kind that draws local ruffians to stare at an outsider. But someone shadowing him this far meant something else. Wealth should not be flaunted. Inside human settlements, they'd held back. Outside, there were no rules. He drew himself a little straighter. It was time. The bushes rustled. "Sir, if I were you, I'd hand over everything now unless you want to lose your head." Swish, 3 or 4 daggers slid free in answer. A group of scruffy, masked men stepped out from the roadside, eyes trained on Li Wei so he wouldn't bolt. He registered the information before anything else. 20 health each, no armor. He smiled coldly. "You really think you've got me cornered?" "Otherwise?" the leader snapped. 5 more figures slipped out from behind the trees, 8 in all. These weren't ordinary town bullies. Bandits was a better name. Li Wei could have walked away, but instead he drew himself up. "Try me." The sight of a long sword appearing in his hand made a few of them flinch. "Cowards," the leader barked. "He's a trick. We've killed men like him before." Then, "Charge!" Clang. Steel rang as the leader met Li Wei's blade with a dagger. 3 of the bandits surged in from the sides, aiming for vitals. A single hit could be fatal. For a heartbeat, Li Wei's stomach tightened. Then a set of silver-white iron armor shimmered into being over his body, blocking 3 savage stabs. "What?" Several of the men hesitated. First, the sudden weapon, then armor appearing at the first true clash. This was getting absurd. A few thought about running. "Move it! Go!" the leader urged, though he'd already stepped back. Some of them did charge. Li Wei met them head-on. He slashed once to stop the leader's escape, then drove his sword through the man, stepping on the corpse to pull the blade free. He spun, slashed, stabbed. Daggers tried awkward angles, but the bandits' thin blades couldn't penetrate the new armor. Li Wei moved like an avenging god. Whoever he targeted collapsed within seconds. In raw fighting skill, the bandits might have had numbers and experience, but they were no match for an armored man who didn't hesitate. Even 8 of them were less dangerous than a single corpse demon would have been, at least with the armor on. When the others realized their attacks did nothing effective, panic spread. "Witchcraft! Wizard!" someone screamed. "He's unkillable! Run!" They abandoned their weapons and fled into the trees. A few brave ones tried to hold ground, but Li Wei's sword bit down again and again. He chased until only 2 backs remained, then stopped. Pursuing would take too long. The fight was over. He stripped the corpses, dug a shallow pit and buried them, and melted the captured weapons down into raw metal he could carry. For the next several days, the road stayed eerily empty. There were tracks and signs of past travelers, but no people, only the quiet traces of a desolate area. On the 3rd dusk, Li Wei crested a ridge and saw ruins on the horizon. The sight quickened him, monotony broken. He pulled aside a few broken stones and, reconnaissance-like, climbed up to the highest point. Weathertop, he realized, matching the ruins to images in his mind. Even in ruin, it hinted at former grandeur. He explored corners that hadn't completely crumbled, torched them one by one, and pried at loose bricks with quiet fascination. He lost track of time and then tripped. For a moment he thought he'd just twisted an ankle, then the torch went out. Darkness swallowed the summit like a wave. Lei Wei's chest tightened. He had been careless. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. The night was still young. Surely nothing could have gathered yet, right? A breeze brushed his cheek. He turned toward a broken wall and saw something slump to the ground, an arrow pinned through its skull. The face was hideous, green-tinged skin, tusks, an orc. Seeing it, a fresh tremor of unease crawled up his spine. If that arrow had found him instead— Before he could think further, the dark exploded. A chorus of hoarse cries and snarls. Dozens of shapes poured out from hiding places he hadn't seen. "Tonight we feast," one raucous voice shouted. "Human flesh! Fresh!" The sounds were ferocious but chaotic. Lei Wei made a quick assessment. About a dozen of them, ragged gear, their hides thin, 16 or 17 health apiece, missing pieces of armor. Orc rabble, not seasoned warriors. Dangerous in groups, but not unbeatable. They charged. Lei Wei charged back. His sword took 2 down with a single clean arc. The others surged in, trying to overwhelm him. Orcs were cowards, and cowards when it mattered at close quarters, but desperate in numbers. While he cleaved through their center, 2 tried to flank him and stab at his waist. 2 sharp whistles cut through the din. Both flankers fell with arrows in their foreheads. "You stinking rat, come out!" An orc barked at the noise. Another arrow answered from a different direction, felling him. The rest were no match for Lei Wei. He moved through them with steady, efficient strikes. Their thin skin and low stamina made the killing almost clinical. All the while, unseen hands fired arrows that thinned their ranks and kept surprise attackers from reaching him. In a few minutes, the dozen or so were down, sprawled in the gloom. A line of text flashed through his mind like a stamp of recognition. Achievement unlocked, title gained, Orc Slayer. Lei Wei shook the blood from his blade and stowed it in his pack to show he bore no malice. He turned toward the darkness where the arrows had come from, but saw nothing, only black. "May I ask who you are?" Lei Wei called out. "Just a wanderer." A figure detached itself from the darkness. There were no footsteps, only a voice. If the man hadn't announced himself, Lei Wei might never have noticed him. Lei Wei resisted the urge to light a torch and instead let the moonlight reveal the newcomer's outline. Tall, cloaked, a dagger at his waist, and a simple wooden bow slung across his back. His face was shaded by a hood, features swallowed by shadow. "Thank you," Lei Wei said. The stranger shrugged. "You're welcome. Those orcs were my quarry anyway. I'd been tracking them for a while. You just made my work easier." As he spoke, he began checking the bodies and looting the arrows from the ones Lei Wei hadn't finished. "You shouldn't be so careless at night on high ground," he added. Lei Wei shifted awkwardly and changed the topic. "Are you a Dunedain?" The man's gray eyes glinted in the darkness. "Yes." By then, the bodies with arrows in their heads had already been searched. The corpses Lei Wei had slain lay untouched. "I heard some Dunedain were secretly patrolling these wilds," Lei Wei said. "Seems like they weren't exaggerating." The man chuckled softly. "People like to tell stories." Lei Wei nodded. "Did you kill those things from the ancient tomb?" The wanderer's gaze turned sharper. "Yes. How did you know?" "Just a hunch. I used to deal with them a lot." Lei Wei didn't press. He had another idea. He dug out the corroded, broken sword the wight had dropped and tossed it over. The stranger caught it, turning it in his hands. His surprised expression softened into something almost like reverence. "You recognize this?" Lei Wei asked. The wanderer, now visible enough for the moon to pick out a few sharp lines, nodded. "Very familiar. It's an old weapon of ours. The forging techniques are lost to time, but with work it might be usable." Lei Wei shrugged and handed it over. "Then it's yours." "For real?" The man smiled faintly. "You could sell it for a good price to someone who knows what it is. I'd rather give it to someone who needs it than sell it to someone who wants it. Besides, it means more to you." The wanderer bowed his head briefly. "I appreciate it. Take this as a token." He fumbled through a pocket and pressed a coin into Lei Wei's palm. "If you need anything, wait for me at the Forgotten Inn. I stop there regularly. I'll be there within half a month." "My name's Lei Wei," Lei Wei offered. "What should I call you?" Follow done. After that, Follow done melted back into the dark. Li Wei watched the spot where he'd stood and felt a dozen new ideas stir. This place wasn't bad at all. Half a month later, Li Wei crawled up out of the mine tunnels with a grin. His pack was heavy with raw iron ore and several stacks of cobblestone the bastion couldn't hold any longer. Hard work paid off. After weeks of digging, he had struck an iron vein. He didn't yet know how large it was, but it was more than enough to keep him busy for a while. Scattered among the rock, he'd also pulled up copper, sulfur, and saltpeter. He didn't always know what they were by sight, but the system tagged them with item IDs the moment they hit his inventory. Once he had sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal together, a new recipe unlocked on the crafting table: gunpowder. And later, TNT. From then on, he paid special attention to gathering those minerals while tunneling. After confirming the area's resources, Li Wei picked a site for his first base and marked it on the map, roughly between Wind and Cloud Peak and the Troll Forest, a bit off the main road. It had trees, a freshwater lake, and a wide, flat plain. The frequent orc and warg activity was a nuisance, but not a deal-breaker. A month later, a bastion of stone and timber rose from that plain, walls 7 to 8 meters high, enclosing a generous plot. From within the courtyard, a spring gushed as if summoned, irrigating a field of wheat that ripened startlingly fast, golden waves of grain that made the place look almost peaceful. Smoke curled from chimneys now and then. The walls looked inhabited. One evening, Li Wei trudged toward the entrance with a pickaxe on his shoulder and a sack brimming with ore. Halfway up the gate, he froze. Someone sat on the battlement, watching him. Li Wei had no idea when the man had climbed up. "Followed in?" he called. The man waved and then dropped to the ground with effortless grace, landing lightly from the wall. Up close in the daylight, his face was no longer a shadow. Black hair, gray eyes, handsome features that could pass for 30 or 40 if the long-lived Dunedain hadn't told a different story. Appearance aside, his agility was impressive. "How did you find this place?" Li Wei asked. "I heard rumors. A wizard built a bastion out of nothing and planted a field that grows in days." Falodon grinned. "When they described the fellow, I knew it had to be you. Besides, you're hard to miss. Smoke every day. You were never going to be invisible." "You could at least try," Li Wei said. "Come in and sit. I just finished the kitchen. Try some of my cooking." "No time." Falodon's face sobered. "I came because a squad of orc cavalry is heading this way. Over 100 in total. Dozens of them are warg riders." Li Wei's breath hitched. Wargs were terrifying. They could leap several meters in a single bound and clamber up trees as easily as cats. With their riders mounted on those leaping beasts, they could clear walls and buildings if given the chance. His 7 or 8 meter walls were high, but not an absolute guarantee, and those cobblestones were smooth, offering few handholds. "They're not here yet," Falodon added. "You still have time to withdraw." "No," Li Wei said, more loudly than he felt. "I just built this place. I'm not leaving." Falodon studied the makeshift castle and the stout young man who refused to budge. "If you stay, it'll be hard to stop that squad without more preparation. Their leader is unusually large and strong. That wooden gate of yours won't hold him long." "It'll be fine. I've got a plan," Li Wei insisted. He wasn't quite certain what the plan was yet, but the idea of abandoning his work to some orc band felt worse than facing the fight. Falodon studied him for a long moment and then nodded slowly. "All right, I believe you have your ways, but they're coming tonight unless something unexpected slows them. You should make real preparations." "Tonight?" Li Wei's voice cracked with a tiny edge of panic. He hadn't meant to sound frightened, but he was new to actual battles. The worst thing he'd faced before was a handful of bandits. Now he had to hold a fortress against 100 orcs, dozens of mounted on wargs, with an exceptionally strong leader heading the charge. Sweat prickled along his spine. He felt the night tighten around the walls, and for the first time since he'd started digging and building, the weight of everything he'd begun to create pressed down on him. Chapter 11. War Preparations. After telling Falodon, Li Wei wasted no time. He turned and went straight back into the castle to begin preparing supplies. With permission, Falodon followed him inside the walls, curiosity written across his face as he looked around. Li Wei headed for the castle's smelting room. gathered a row of iron ingots that had just come out of the furnaces, then opened a chest labeled minerals. Inside lay 5 full stacks of iron blocks and a few other ores, 1 stack of sulfur and 43 pieces of saltpeter among them, level 35. The haul was the result of a month of constant mining. "How do you plan to deal with this?" Falodan asked as Li Wei counted his supplies. The seasoned wanderer had already inspected the inner structure of the city walls and frowned. The defenses were rudimentary at best, a simple stone wall with a few ladders to climb up, no cover on the parapet. Once on top, you'd be completely exposed, a living target. With such a bare wall and what looked like a flimsy wooden gate, Falodan couldn't imagine how Li Wei intended to hold the place. "By magic? We'll defend it like this," Li Wei answered ambiguously, and produced over a dozen stacks of cobblestone. In a few trips, and within minutes, he had raised the wall by a full 5 meters. Falodan watched the stones assemble into a seamless, immovable structure and was dumbfounded. Where had all those stones come from? How did they join so perfectly? The sight left him bewildered. This kind of building ability was almost godlike. Any nation that secured a craftsman like Li Wei would be transformed. He was worth more than 10,000 soldiers. "So that's why you're confident you can hold this place," Falodan said, recovering quickly. "But your fortifications are really primitive. Listen to me. Do this and this." Li Wei listened intently. His face brightened. As someone who usually built with aesthetics in mind, he had often prioritized looks over function. Falodan's suggestions sparked a breakthrough. Within half an hour, he had a clear idea of the castle's defensive engineering, structure, and purpose. Falodan guided him in real time, where to build cover, where to leave arrow slits, where to set anti-climbing obstacles. They worked all afternoon, and by twilight, another watchtower stood on the wall. Li Wei took a big bite of dried beef and offered some to Falodan. "Try my cooking, System brand secret dried beef." Falodan didn't know what Li Wei meant by system, but he accepted a piece. The aroma burst through the meat with the first bite. "Delicious. Even the best royal chefs couldn't improve this," he said. Loyal System Gourmet fan +1. Seeing the castle transformed into something both functional and presentable, Falodan admitted he had nothing more to offer. Everything was ready. Now they only had to wait. "As your scout reported, that warg cavalry squad will attack tonight," Li Wei said as dusk fell. "Aren't you leaving?" Falodan chewed and swallowed. "No. I want to see how you handle them." He added casually, "Besides, one more man can't hurt." But he had other thoughts beneath the words. A direct fight against a cavalry squad of over 100 would be impossible for him alone. If Li Wei failed, Falodan had resolved to take him and run, to prevent Li Wei from refusing to flee and being killed or captured by the orcs. "Aren't you afraid?" Li Wei asked. "Fighting and killing are part of my life," Falodan replied with a calm shrug. Li Wei snorted inwardly at the bravado, then said, "All right, if you insist on staying, take these. Consider them a gift." He set a suit of iron armor and an iron longsword on the ground. Falodan's eyes widened. The armor was finely made, and the sword's edge looked keen. "Put it on," Li Wei urged. Once Falodan donned the armor, he felt the difference immediately. The silvery iron was sturdy but surprisingly light. It didn't impede movement at all. The craftsmanship was clever and well-balanced. "You always manage to surprise me, Li Wei," Falodan said, genuinely impressed. He hefted the sword. "Looks like I'll have to put in a bit more effort tonight." Night fell quickly. The sky was overcast, and from the dark line of trees surrounding the clearing, pairs of scarlet eyes watched the castle that had sprung up seemingly overnight. Orcs weren't the sharpest creatures, but they understood danger and power. They knew about wizards, elven lords, and other strong beings. What if a powerful defender dwelt behind those walls? Still, they'd watched the castle's progress for 10 days, fields planted, walls raised, buildings added. Beyond the speed of its construction, the human inside had shown no other obvious powers. "This castle will do," a scout orc reported when he returned to his leader. "And the wargs smell fresh meat. There must be a lot of it inside." The thought of meat set the orcs roaring. "I'm sick of moldy rations and maggots. I want fresh meat. Human meat," they cried. Their leader slammed a massive rock for silence. The crack it made curbed the shouting. "Quiet," he growled. "Get ready. We move tonight. I'll eat roasted human meat before dawn." A roar answered him. The wargs gave low, eager growls, and the orcs prepared to depart, their cheers muffled by the trees as they gathered for the attack. Chapter 12. Defending the City. Did you hear that? I heard it. Wargs and noisy orcs. The calls from the wild rode the night breeze, but inside the city walls, everything was quiet. Even after all the preparations, Leeway felt a knot of unease. Unlike the wanderer beside him, he hadn't seen many battles. The thought of an orc cavalry unit charging at them, dozens of riders on wargs, made his stomach tighten. 100 orcs didn't sound like much, but they could easily encircle and trap 2 people. He glanced at the 5 blocks of iron in his pack and regretted not buying pumpkins in Bree. An iron golem would have been useful now. A beastly roar split the air. "They're here," Falodon said. The 2 of them pressed against the crenellations and peered toward the noise. Clatter, clatter. Kill! Shadows burst from the bushes and into the moonlight. Dozens of wargs poured forward in a line, orc riders brandishing weapons, charging straight for the wall. Their speed matched that of horses. When the leading pack came into range, Falodon knocked an arrow and released it. The arrow struck true. The lead warg collapsed, its rider pitched into the dirt. Another shot cleaved an orc's skull, and he fell dead. By the time the cavalry reached the wall, 2 wargs lay dead, and 3 riders had been unseated. Blood only made the others more ferocious. Seeing only 2 figures on the ramparts, they jeered and pressed harder. Still, a stone wall over 10 meters high couldn't be scaled in an instant. The warg riders tried again and again and kept failing. Finally, they fell back to regroup. "The intel was wrong," an orc scout spat. "Who says wargs jump right over?" "When I saw this wall last, it was only half this height," another complained. Frustrated, the unit turned to what orcs did best, argue. Falodon tried to keep firing, but the attackers had taken cover and trained archers on his position. He was forced to withdraw from the parapet and fire through the arrow slits he'd prepared. A few more cavalry fell, then the enemy discovered those slits and neutralized them. From his peak through a crenelle, Leeway watched the entire force bunch up at the base of the wall. Neither side could break the other. The attackers couldn't get in, the defenders couldn't inflict enough damage. Outside, the orcs jeered and cursed. Their insults barely registered with Leeway. After a while, he found them oddly amusing, colorful, inventive in their own crude way, though still primitive compared to the barbed creativity of internet trolls he'd seen back home. Then a roar came again, deeper and closer. A hulk of an orc, well over 3 meters tall and wielding a massive axe, shoved through the ranks. He casually knocked a warg and its rider aside as if swatting flies. "Aha! Look at the little worms hiding behind walls," he bellowed, pointing at the city. "Cowards! Chicken-hearted!" the orcs shouted in answer. Such taunts could break morale in a normal siege, but there were only 2 defenders, and both of them were safe behind 10 meters of stone. Leeway bristled inwardly. 100 of you attacking 2 of us, and you call us cowards. If you're brave, come at me one-on-one. The orc leader didn't care for Leeway's inner thoughts. He shrugged off a stray arrow with his axe and shouted back, "Bring it up." With a creak and a grunt, orcs hauled forward a ram thicker than a man. The leader took it in one massive hand and slammed it into the wooden gate. Thud, crud, deform. Cheers rose outside as the gate gave way after the 3rd strike. The orcs readied to surge in, hungry for plunder. Leeway leaned out and shouted, "Want to come in? No way!" An arrow thudded into the gate right where his head had been. The sudden retaliation scared the leader back. But when the gate collapsed, the attackers froze. Beyond the wooden palisade, a 3-meter-thick stone wall loomed, blocking their entry. The leader's nostrils flared with smoke. He cursed, then signaled a retreat. "Let's go," he roared, and the 100-odd orcs began pulling back into the woodland realm. "They're retreating already?" Leeway said, surprised. "They gave up too easily, just because they couldn't breach a wooden gate?" "They haven't left," Falodon warned, pointing. A tree thudded as it was uprooted and dragged away. Another fell. Soon a chorus of bangs and saws came from the forest. They were building on the spot. "Ladders," Falodon said. "They're making siege ladders." Leeway blinked. He hadn't expected orcs to have that kind of skill. "Don't underestimate them, Leeway," Falodon went on. "They're crude and brutal, but their smithing and carpentry aren't inferior to ours. If a human army can do it, so can they. Remember who backs them, Sauron, forgings in their blood. Li Wei nodded. He understood now, and he wasn't going to just wait for ladders to appear. I'm going out, he said. Faladin's face tightened. It's too dangerous. I don't approve. Li Wei smiled. Wanderer or no, Faladin didn't know MC players. Don't worry. He dropped from the wall, entered the keep, and emptied the mineral chest onto the workbench. Sulfur and saltpeter, charcoal from the fire pit. He set the ingredients to the tools like someone who'd done this before. 1 sulfur plus 1 saltpeter plus 1 charcoal made 3 gunpowder. 5 gunpowder plus 4 sand made 1 TNT. He worked steadily until every last usable resource was turned over. When he finished packing the explosives, his backpack was heavier. 20 blocks of TNT nestled inside. Ever heard of high-altitude bombing? He asked, grinning as he hefted the pack. Chapter 13. Air Raid. Strike while they're unprepared and take their lives. Li Wei refused Faladin's offer to go with him. Wait inside the city. Watch the show, he told him. He gathered his materials, silently pried 2 cobblestones free, and slipped out through the gap in the wall. The orcs were busy assembling siege ladders. They would never expect someone to leave the castle while they were building. Better yet, Li Wei planned to take the initiative and ambush them. 1 man against 100. If he struck when they were unprepared, the advantage would be his. The orc leader, sure of himself, had decided it didn't matter whether he left a few men behind to guard or not. The castle's archer was reputedly lethal. Too many left behind would be wasted. Too few, and they might walk into death. He settled on sending no patrols. That calculation, though brazen, would prove fatally wrong. Hurry up, you trash! Get those ladders together! If I'm not inside the castle by dawn, I'll throw you to the wargs, the leader barked, pacing among the work gang. Deep in the nearby woods, a warg nosed the air and twitched. Its rider leaned forward. What is it? Smell something? They moved out to investigate. In a small clearing not far from where the orcs worked stood a slender stone pillar thrusting up into the sky, perfectly square and about a meter thick. The warg rider squinted upward, certain something moved at the top of the column, but unable to make it out. He raised his torch and saw only a vague silhouette. A bird? A crow? He shrugged. Then the top of the pillar shifted. An unnatural extension reached outward toward the camp where the ladders were being made. What is that? A living stone? The rider muttered. On the tower, Li Wei wiped cold sweat from his brow and crouched at the edge, slipping the next block into place and extending the structure another cubit. He glanced down and felt his knees tremble. He hated heights. A torch glowed below beside the empty space he'd been building. Damn it, he'd been spotted. He forced himself to breathe slowly, steadied his shaking legs, and worked faster, concealing himself as best he could from below. Maybe it was the tower's sheer closeness, or maybe there was always one sharper eye among a crowd of dull ones. When Li Wei's platform rose some 70 to 80 meters above the ladder crews, one orc finally looked up and squinted into the sky. What's that up there? He asked. Several heads turned. People stopped working and stared. I swear I see something, someone said. A crow? Could be a person. Whatever it is, shoot it down and we'll know. An archer not far off knocked an arrow and drew. At that height, a skilled shot might have hit something, if there had been time. A red object streaked out of the sky, shining with a white core, and plunged into the midst of the orcs. Boom. The explosion threw up a crater several meters across. A tree lost branches. The orcs caught in the blast were ripped apart. Li Wei had calculated it. TNT deals up to 65 points of damage. The average orc had only a little over 10 health. There was no surviving that. What was that? The leader shouted, stunned. He grabbed his heavy wooden mallet and rushed to the scene, finding instead a field of torn earth, mangled limbs, and bodies burned black. Nobody answered him. A scout pointed to the sky. Look, more objects. 7 or 8, the scout counted, glowed and fell in rapid succession. The leader's face soured. He planted his mallet horizontally as a shield, then thought better of it and stepped back, pushing his few remaining men in front of him. More blows came. TNT after TNT slammed into the camp. Explosions lit the clearing white, screams cut off mid-scream. Craters bloomed where men and machines had been. Those nearest were vaporized. Those farther out were hurled into the air and died before they hit the ground. The leader was lucky to still be in one piece, though the shockwave sent him rolling into a tree, the mallet blackened and useless beside him. All around him, the squad was a ruin. Blood, shredded flesh, broken limbs, some hanging from branches. A few crawling survivors whimpered, but none of them would live long. The leader stared at the hellscape, dazed and struggling to understand. From the start to the end of the assault, he hadn't seen an enemy, only sudden annihilation. Finally, he understood. The attack came from above. Rage and fear warred on his face. A rustle in the bushes announced the approach of a band of returning warg riders. They halted, stunned by the scene, then jumped down and called out, "Leader, we're here to reinforce you." They fanned out, searching, anger and panic in every face. The leader looked up, realizing there weren't ground troops to blame. Then the sky filled with more red sparks falling like meteors. Over a dozen glowing charges hurtled down and detonated where the riders had gathered. When the last blast faded, the clearing was almost unrecognizable. The orc contingent that had been so confident in its numbers lay broken and burned, its ladder project abandoned, its siege plans smashed in dust. Smoke curled toward the treetops. Li Wei, high above and out of sight, allowed himself a shaky breath. The ambush had worked to lethal perfection. Note: orc and goblin are often used interchangeably. Either term may be used depending on preference. Boom! Using the light from the explosion, Li Wei peered down from the edge of the platform. After 2 rounds of TNT detonated in quick succession, the 2 orc squads were, if not completely annihilated, then utterly smashed. The clearing was a ruin, craters where the explosives had gone off, exposed rock strata, and no trace of the trees and undergrowth that had stood there before. Trees at the edge of the blast had caught fire. Smoke rose thick and black. Li Wei stared at the scene and muttered, "What a sight!" Setting a mountain on fire would get you a life sentence, he thought, and waited a while by the dying embers to make sure there was no movement on the ground. Only when he was satisfied did he pull a bucket of water out and set it at his feet. With a whoosh, a stream of water flowed down from the platform, forming a small waterfall that reached the forest floor and put out the nearby fires. Only then did Li Wei take a breath and follow the water down. He didn't use leap of faith. He had a bad fear of heights and hadn't tested whether landing in water would negate fall damage. If it didn't, dying on the spot would be a very bad look. On the ground, he began to search. First, to be sure there were no survivors. Second, to see if there was anything worth salvaging. Either the orcs were very poor, or the TNT had been too thorough. After a long search, he only found a few broken pieces of armor and weapons, and some silver coins blackened by the blast. He pulled out a torch and inspected them for a long time, unable to tell their origin, but silver was silver. Finally, he had some loose change and wouldn't have to pay for everything with gems. Humph. A sudden, ragged gasp nearby made him jump. Turning, he found a towering orc slumped against a tree, missing an arm and a leg, his armor blown to shredded plates, blood seeping through the dirt. A huge, charred wooden mallet lay at his side. It could only be the orc chieftain. He glared at Li Wei with murderous hatred, chest heaving, obviously dying. Not long ago, the same giant had been swaggering in front of the castle, boasting he'd go in and kill Li Wei. You stinking maggot who only knows ambushing," the chieftain spat. He had no idea what had happened, until the flash from the blast gave him a look at his enemy. It wasn't a dragon, it was a human. Whatever had blown them apart must be some kind of sorcery. "You damned wizard." "Noisy," Li Wei said, drew his longsword, and drove it into the orc's chest. The chieftain went silent at once. Li Wei stared as a small status number above the orc's body dropped to 040th. Good heavens, a health cap of 40. Among orcs, who usually had a dozen or so hit points, this was elite-level physique. No wonder he'd survived the explosions. High HP and armor could let him withstand everything except a direct blast at the center. As the chieftain's chest stopped rising, the nearby bushes rustled. Li Wei chased the sound and saw a lone orc running for his life like a hunted animal. He cut the flyer down and spent the next while hunting a few other stragglers until he was certain there were no more. Then he began cleaning up properly. He gathered the orc's scrap armor and weapons to be smelted at the castle's blast furnace. The wargs didn't carry much, but their bodies were useful. Warg meat for emergency rations, warg fur for fur equipment synthesis, and bones for making bone meal, 3 uses from one carcass. Loaded with a backpack full of spoils under the moon, Li Wei trudged back to the castle. On the way, he repaired the ruined gate and cleared the stones blocking the path behind it. "You're back, Li Wei," Hobbiton said. He'd been waiting at the gate for a long time. "How are things? I heard strange noises and saw a light. Was that you?" Surprise and relief warred on the ranger's face. He'd watched nervously from the city wall while the orcs prepared and didn't know whether to trust Li Wei's plan. Then he'd seen the flash and heard the blast. Flames had shot into the sky, and a moment later, something like rain had fallen and put the fires out. "That orc squad is dealt with. No need to worry," Li Wei said. "Ah?" Hobbiton was dumbstruck. "You, by yourself, stopped an infantry squad of over 100 orcs and dozens of direwolf riders?" He didn't count the chieftain, who had been tough enough to leave a ruined gate as proof. "Correction." Li Wei raised a finger. "It wasn't a repulse. It was annihilation. I searched. There were no survivors." Hobbiton whistled softly. "How the hell did you do that?" He looked as if he might not even want to know the answer, but then his expression shifted. "I once read in old books that powerful wizards can command lightning and fire, call up wind and rain at will. The White Wizard of Isengard was said to have such powers." He stared at Li Wei. "Are you one of those wizards?" "If you mean a gray robe like in the stories, then no," Li Wei said. Hobbiton didn't look convinced. "If you had that sort of power, why wouldn't you have used it before?" "It was dynamite." "Dynamite? What's that?" "A weapon filled with gunpowder. Light it and it explodes." "Gunpowder?" Hobbiton frowned. "I've only seen it in dwarf firearms and in fireworks. Can it be that powerful?" He seemed reluctantly willing to accept it. "And the water that fell from the sky?" "That was a bucket I carried with me," Li Wei said. Hobbiton gave him a look that said he thought Li Wei was pulling his leg. Li Wei hesitated for a moment. He could explain the workbench-made TNT and how it functioned, but better to let the ranger think what he wanted. "Then just assume it's magic," he said. Hobbiton's expression instantly became the one of a man whose theory had been confirmed, half in awe, half relieved. Faction system activated. Dunedain, faction reputation 50. Current Dunedain faction reputation friendly. World map activated. Territory claim enabled. The sudden prompts cut through Li Wei's annoyance. Factions and maps? Had new mods unlocked? He ignored everything else and opened the newly added interface, skimming the instructions. The first entry was the faction reputation system. When you did something that benefited a faction, your reputation with that faction increased, but only if the faction could learn of your deed. If you were too far from that faction's area of activity, your actions might not be noticed, and no reputation would be gained. Li Wei was currently inside the Dunedain's area, and Hobbiton had witnessed him taking out that cavalry squad. Because Hobbiton saw it, the Dunedain received the full reputation bonus, instantly bumping Li Wei's standing to friendly. If, on the other hand, Li Wei slipped into some remote corner of Mordor and ambushed a pack of orcs, no matter how many he killed, he wouldn't gain any credit unless the deed was reported. He might even lose reputation with Mordor instead. Reputation wasn't just a label, it had practical effects. Now that he was friendly with the Dunedain, any Dunedain he met later would start off treating him as an ally. The second function was the world map. It recorded places Li Wei had visited and marked which factions operated where. He hadn't traveled far yet. The digital map showed only the stretch from the Shire to Bree and then to his bastion. The rest was a fog of war. "After this battle, your deeds will spread across this wilderness, Li Wei," Hobbiton said, pulling Li Wei's thoughts back from the interface. "You solved a tough problem for us. Dealing with that assembled squad wouldn't have been an overnight affair." The ranger's tone was polite, respectful. "I must thank you on behalf of the free people of this land." He added quieter, "If you hadn't warned me in time, I might have been ambushed myself. I may even have had to abandon the bastion and flee." Li Wei nodded. "I should thank you too, Hobbiton." It wasn't flattery, it was true. If he'd rushed in without the preparation, the warg's leaping ability might have overwhelmed the hastily built wall. "From now on," Li Wei continued, "you and your kin may enter my bastion freely. No need to ask permission. Rest and use the supplies as you need. Consider it a small repayment. Falodon didn't refuse. A secure bastion, even if used only occasionally, would be a great help. A prompt blinked up on the interface. Dunedain faction reputation +10. Leeway smiled. The old ranger was sincere. Something else occurred to him. He glanced at Falodon's head. A small health bar popped up over the ranger. 25 thav. 25. Dunedain lived for centuries. Their vitality was stronger than humans. That explained the higher health. By contrast, Leeway thought of the elite orc he'd fought, the one with roughly 40 health. That kind of endurance hinted at some ogre blood, he decided. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so tough. Night had deepened by then. After a tense, exhausting ambush, Leeway was tired. He said his goodbyes and slept. When he rose early the next morning, Falodon was gone. Only a set of iron armor in the guest room proved the ranger had been there. He hadn't taken the armor Leeway had offered. Leeway shook his head. The man was stubbornly proud. He also remembered now that another system had activated the previous day, but he'd been too distracted to explore it. Territory claim. You can claim an unclaimed building area as your territory. You gain 1 territory claim quota every 10 levels. Current claimable territories, 0-3. The territory feature reminded Leeway of another mod, utility tools, which had allowed staking claims to land. Without hesitation, he claimed the bastion he'd built under his feet as his first territory. Please confirm territory name. He thought a moment. The bastion sat just off the main road, a small defensive post that travelers might actually see. Call it Roadside Fort. Territory, Roadside Fort, created successfully. Leeway painted a wooden sign and hung it over the gate, Roadside Fort. From then on, everything within those walls was his territory. The interface explained the benefits. Storage blocks like chests were protected. Others couldn't open, destroy, or move them without permission. That was the base level of permanent protection. More importantly, he could summon iron golems and snow golems, but only inside his territory. The golems could not leave the claimed area. He felt a sour twinge. The idea of summoning an iron golem army and sweeping through Mordor had been forming in his head, but that plan was dead before it began. On the other hand, the restriction was useful. No one could occupy his base while he was away. Problem fixed. He could go adventuring without worrying the bastion would be taken. Leeway opened chests to gather materials for a golem test, curious what a 100 health iron helper would look like, blocky or textured like real armor, but he was missing a key material, pumpkins. He'd only planted wheat. All his seeds were wheat seeds, and pumpkins had to be found or farmed separately. Settling with that for the moment, he opened the world map and spread out the paper map he'd gotten from Bilbo. To the west of Roadside Fort lay Bree, the route he'd come from and a familiar direction. To the east was Rivendell, and beyond that the Misty Mountains. By his estimation, he was roughly equidistant from Bree and Rivendell. Rivendell tempted him. He had yet to see elves in person. If his memory served, Aragorn was in Rivendell at this time. Still a child, perhaps under 10. The thought of seeing both elves and a future king in his childhood years pulled at him as he considered where to go next. Chapter 16. Purchase. Leeway was extremely curious about this king of men who would appear decades from now. It would be nice to meet him in advance if he could, but a trip to Rivendell would likely keep him away for a long time, and without the ability to summon an iron golem, his castle would be utterly defenseless. After some thought, he decided to return to Bree first, pick up the supplies he needed, and secure his territory before attempting anything else. He left a sign carved with "temporarily out" on the castle gate, packed several stacks of food, gathered his tools and equipment, and set off west along the main road. The return trip was much easier than the outbound journey. He knew the route, he had plenty of food, and best of all, he had a world map now, so he could track his position and estimate travel time. The road was dull but uneventful. Arriving at Bree's main gate, he presented himself for inspection. The guard's attitude surprised him. At the wicket, a guard cracked open a small wooden window, glanced at Leeway, and without a question, swung the gate open, waving him through. "Welcome, friend. How's the road been lately?" Leeway blinked for a moment and then answered, "Fine. Smooth. I didn't run into any trouble." "That's good." The guard nodded and went back to his post. Leeway walked into town, thinking. He opened his faction interface to check Bree. Bree regional reputation, 34. Friendly. Source, killed bandits, eliminated an orc squad. So that was it. Although the reputation module had unlocked relatively late, his earlier deeds had registered. At 10 reputation points, a faction's attitude turned friendly. Higher ranks required more. The next threshold here was 100 points. He didn't linger on it. He had a clear purpose in Bree. Buy supplies he couldn't make himself. Seeds for pumpkins, potatoes, carrots, and the like, and a horse. Humans simply couldn't travel as fast or as comfortably as horses. In endurance terms, he might outlast a horse. He didn't need to stop to eat except for half a stack of dried meat per 100 kilometers, but constantly running wasn't practical. He was tired of it. First, he checked into the Leaping Horse Inn and asked the owner if he could procure 2 good horses. Maybe the friendly reputation helped, or maybe he was just spending freely. The innkeeper agreed readily and promised to bring the 2 finest horses in Bree as quickly as possible. How quick was as quickly as possible? Li Wei couldn't say. He could only wait. After a hearty meal in the common room, he went out to ask where to buy vegetables. With his friendly status, the locals were helpful. After 2 casual questions, a passerby pointed him to the markets and vendors across Bree. Following the directions, Li Wei found a farm. "Welcome, sir. What can I help you with?" the farmer asked cheerfully. Li Wei laid out his needs. Fortunately, the farm stocked everything he wanted: pumpkins, potatoes, carrots, wheat, and corn. He plucked a handful from a basket. "Synthus unlock corn seed. Give me a sack of those too," he said. "Right away, sir. Bree's most diligent hands are at your service," the farmer replied, beaming. Nearby were spring onions, ginger, and garlic, still flecked with soil. "I'll take these as well." "Right away." After the transactions, Li Wei had spent all the silver he'd brought, including the darkened coins he'd scavenged from the orc squad. The farmer couldn't stop smiling. This had been an excellent sale. Li Wei hadn't even haggled. He just pointed at crops and bought in bulk. Come back next time. Maybe not next time, Li Wei thought wryly. Just wait till you see what my MC-style farming can do. Wheat that ripens in a few days. Ever seen that? Carrying the sacks in his inventory, he felt accomplished. He only regretted not finding watermelons. He hadn't seen any grown around here. With the seeds collected, all that remained was for the innkeeper to deliver the promised horses so he could head home. Seeds he could resolve at a crafting table. After crafting, the crops could be converted into MC-style seeds. But he hadn't tried animal breeding yet. Around Roadside Fort, he'd only spotted a few wild cattle occasionally, and they couldn't be led home, useful only for meat. By buying 2 horses now, he planned to try breeding MC-style horses when he got back. That required gold, at least 2 golden carrots, and gold ore had been maddeningly scarce. He'd been chipping at ore veins near Roadside Fort for over a month without a glimmer. He would have to trade for gold. He went to the blacksmith shop, hoping the smith might have something to trade. The smith looked up from his work and recognized him immediately. "Oh, it's you. Hello. Do you need something?" "I'm honored you remember me," Li Wei said. "Of course. I heard an adventurer passing through Bree fought off a band of bandits single-handedly, then took out a bunch of orcs and wargs," the blacksmith said, setting down his tools. He leaned in, conspiratorial. "They say you can do magic. Is that true?" Li Wei cut him off. "Let's not get into that now. I came to buy materials. Do you have any gold?" The blacksmith laughed and held up his hands. "I'm a blacksmith, not a goldsmith, sir." Li Wei's shoulders dropped. Just as he was about to leave, a familiar voice piped up from behind a nearby fence. Someone popped his head out and called, "Hey, adventurer, heard you were looking to buy." "Get lost, you stinking junk collector. Stay away." The blacksmith barked, no respect in his tone at all. Li Wei turned and saw the smug face he knew, William, the scrap dealer, grinning as always. Chapter 17, Everything is ready. Get lost. After getting his customers poached again, and it wouldn't have worked out anyway, the blacksmith, red-faced with anger, chased William down the street. Li Wei could only trail helplessly behind. Huffing and panting, William still tried to sell. "Sir, I heard you. You want gold, right?" Li Wei, breathless from being chased, didn't stop to scold. "Yes, I want gold. But tell me, do you hang around people's doors every day waiting to steal their business? If I were the blacksmith, I'd want to beat you too." Haha, no, not every day. Just happened to be here today. Li Wei's mouth twitched. Not every day, so often then? Fine. How do you price your gold? As a regular customer, I give you 80% of the market price. That's generous. We're small-time merchants. We're affordable, William said, striking a confident pose. Li Wei remembered the last time William sold him equipment that literally fell apart. He didn't trust the man. You aren't about to hand me copper-plated gold, are you? Still, Li Wei wasn't too worried. Anything he put into his backpack would be tagged with an ID and the material would be clear. Despite his skepticism, Li Wei followed William to a small warehouse. The lane was quiet and dusty. Some houses looked like nobody had lived there in a month. Here they are, sir, William said, digging into the dim interior and bringing out a box. Li Wei opened it and blinked. The box was full of dull, spotted jewelry, bracelets and chains stained and tarnished. Sir, look, this is pure gold. William picked up a bracelet and thumped his chest to prove it. No. Li Wei's eyelids twitched. He took the bracelet. Its surface was so pitted, the original color was nearly gone. He dropped it into his backpack and got the readout. Rusty gold bracelet, estimated recoverable, 2 to 3 gold particles. So that's what it was. The pieces were gold, but they'd been poorly stored and had grime and deposits stuck to them. Gold itself didn't corrode, but other things could cling to the surface and ruin the look. All right, I'll take them all. Appearance didn't matter to Li Wei. Everything would go into the reverse smelting furnace anyway. William's face lit up and he began to gesture at prices. Li Wei had no silver coins on him, so he paid by handing over a pile of antique jewelry instead. The trade emptied half of his inventory, but he walked away with a much larger volume of gold items. Most of the things Li Wei had scavenged from whites were silver, and in Middle-earth silver fetched high prices. Elves especially prized it. William had swapped more than double the volume in gold for Li Wei's silver pieces. Looking at William's smug smile, Li Wei knew the dealer hadn't taken a loss, but that didn't matter. The job was done. William clearly knew how to work a marketplace. His warehouse might have looked like junk, but he could sell anything he thought a customer might want. He wasn't poor. He had assets. When Li Wei left, William watched him go and wiped his brow. How'd it go? Came a voice from a nearby ruin of a house. A scruffy man in gray shuffled out. Barely didn't lose money, William said with a strained grin. Did he find anything of note? Not so far. Whatever you did, don't let him know about it, the bearded man said slowly. That night, I heard a tremendous crash on the main road. A big fire started in the forest. Then the sky let loose and put it out. I went to see. There were huge pits and a pile of orc bodies. None of them were intact. William's knees suddenly felt weak. I told those bastards not to mess with him. But the weapons in those orcs' hands came from you. You supplied them too? William whispered. That's old business. My advice is, get out of here. Leave while you can. If he finds out, we might not even keep our heads. William fell silent and brooded. Li Wei had no idea any of that had happened. For reasons he didn't understand, a prompt floated over his head. Bree Region Reputation 10. It seemed he had accidentally done something that improved his standing. Back at the inn, Li Wei checked his haul out of curiosity. The smeltable gold pieces would probably make 2 or 3 gold ingots, enough to craft 2 golden carrots. Not a fortune, but useful. The next 2 days were quiet. Li Wei rested, ate at the inn, and wandered the town, soaking up Bree's customs. He bought 2 chickens from a farm to raise. Transporting pigs, cows, and sheep would have been impractical alone, especially with 2 horses already. He felt the inconvenience of traveling solo. On the plus side, wild game was plentiful around the roadside fort, boars and wild cattle. He could try bringing some back to start a ranch. At one stall, he heard a winemaker complaining, "Whenever a dwarf caravan passes, my silver pouch gets fatter, and then they empty my wine cellar." Luck put Li Wei in the right place at the right time. A dwarf caravan came through. Curious, he went to watch. The dwarves dealt in metalwork and wine. They were loud, quick-witted, and endlessly amusing. Each one sounded like a performer with a string of jokes. They were energetic and hearty, and Li Wei's interface showed their vitality. The dwarf peddler asked Li Wei to buy more than once, but despite the banter, Li Wei didn't need anything and left under the peddler's amused glare. When he returned to the inn, the bartender met him. "Sir, your horses are ready." "Good, I'll go see." In the stable, two lively horses stood waiting. Leeway glanced at their status. 2024. Max speed, 10 ms per second. They were nothing special, but serviceable as riding mounts. Everything was ready. He could go home. Then, as he took hold of the reins, a single, frustrating memory surfaced. He couldn't ride a horse. Chapter 18. Territory Expansion. The problem didn't trouble Leeway for long. Under the bartender's watchful gaze, he stiffened and awkwardly swung up onto the horse, catching the man's attempts to reach out and help. The moment he was mounted, a familiar sensation washed over him. Like when he was cooking, everything fell into place. As soon as he thought to move, the horse seemed to act in sync with his mind. The instant his intention shifted, the animal responded. It was the system helping him operate. He could feel the assistance could be overridden at any time by his own skills, but he had no intention of doing that. With the system's aid, confidence flooded him. Early the next morning, he rode one horse and led the other, heading back to the farmer's house to pick up the two chickens. He put them in a cage and set off. The return trip didn't take less time than the trip out. The horses were fast but needed rest and fodder, and when Leeway finally saw a roadside fort ahead, he let out a relieved breath. The gate showed no signs of disturbance. Things had been peaceful. After settling the two horses and the two chickens, Leeway returned to the castle to organize his supplies. First on the list was smelting. He threw all the gold trinkets he'd bought from William into the furnace. His luck held. The smelter produced 4 gold ingots and a gold nugget. He immediately synthesized 2 golden carrots. He went to the stables and offered a golden carrot to one of the horses. The horse sniffed it cautiously, then bit and chewed. Red hearts soon floated above its head. Leeway didn't hesitate and fed the second horse the other golden carrot. The 2 large horses leaned against one another without realizing what had happened. Achievement unlocked. Where did I come from? The notification appeared as a bewildered little foal had already squeezed itself between the 2 adults. One of the larger horses jumped back in surprise, eyes wide. Leeway, however, grinned. The foal inherited the fastest bloodline, speed 11, health 26. While the parents inspected the newborn, Leeway pulled 2 chickens out and fed them wheat seeds. Before long, a chick with unusually wise eyes hatched. Looking at that knowing stare, Leeway couldn't help but sigh. All these silly little offspring somehow looked the same. Holding the foal in his left arm and the chick in his right, Leeway felt the future opening up. He didn't even rest that day. He picked up a pickaxe and cobblestones and set to work dismantling and rebuilding the city walls. In a single day, he more than doubled the territory. He laid out new agricultural and livestock zones, built separate stables and troughs for the horses. Roadside Fort now covered tens of thousands of square meters. To any passerby, it might look like the estate of some minor lord. He kept breeding animals as he expanded. Once a bred pair produced offspring, the original animals were no longer needed for breeding. After some thought, Leeway fenced off a separate paddock to keep the originals, isolating them from the new stock. With the major construction finished, he planned the crop zones: pumpkins, wheat, potatoes, radishes, corn, scallions, ginger, garlic. Another day passed. Leeway surveyed the neatly divided fields with satisfaction. The seed beds were growing well. Though the pastures still looked sparse, they'd fill as breeding continued. He'd only bred 2 horses so far and was out of gold, so more was on hold for now. At least he had animals that didn't need rest and could run continuously. Their fuel cost was a trivial 3 blades of grass per 100 kilometers, more symbolic than anything. Overall, Roadside Fort was prospering. That night, a pumpkin vine accelerated with bone meal produced its first square pumpkin. Leeway placed it atop an iron block and summoned the territory's first iron golem. With a clang, the pumpkin fused to the block and transformed into a 3-meter-tall, long-armed iron giant, mottled with moss and vines. This golem was more realistic and rounded than the blocky versions in the game, but still heavy and dull in appearance. It immediately began patrolling the territory. The iron golem's targeting was simple. Malicious, it attacked. Non-malicious, it ignored. A day later, there were 20 iron golems in the castle. With that many guardians, small raiding parties of fewer than 100 people could be repelled easily, and even several hundred orcs would be a serious challenge. Roadside Fort's safety had a preliminary guarantee. Another week passed. The crops yielded their first harvest, and seeing several stacks of vegetables in the warehouse gave Li Wei genuine pleasure. That night he pulled a few scallions and made stir-fried beef with scallions. It tasted heavenly. Life felt almost divine. One day while out mining, Li Wei spotted 3 wild oxen drinking at a lakeshore. He changed course, approached quietly, fenced one in with all his strength, knocked it out, and dragged it back to the castle. Wild oxen were vastly tougher than ordinary animals. Their health was impressive. The next day, he staked out the lake again and brought back another. The 2 wild oxen had company in the pasture now, supplying unlimited milk, and with a little wheat, he bred 2 small wild oxen to ensure future meat supplies. It was a solid win. Soon he found wild boars as well and repeated the same method. Stake out, approach slowly, fence one, knock it out, drag it home. After settling the boars, Li Wei built a simple egg collection system. Hoppers beneath the chicken coop leading into chests, so he no longer had to pick up eggs by hand. For half a month since returning from Bree, Li Wei's days were full. He was always either mining or tending crops and animals. Even though he used iron constantly, his stockpile grew rather than diminished. The iron vein he'd discovered still seemed plentiful. With everything running smoothly and supplies abundant, he began planning a trip east. Early one morning, he fitted a saddle and iron horse armor to the faster horse, just about to set off, when an unexpected visitor arrived, Falodon. "Hello," the ranger called. Li Wei, already dressed and ready, called back from a distance. "How have you been?" "So-so," Falodon replied, glancing around Roadside Fort in surprise. "This place looks different. It seems much larger. And—" he swept his gaze over the farm and pastures inside the walls. "I remember last time you didn't have any of this." "Oh, I planted those a few days ago," Li Wei said. Falodon raised an eyebrow. The corn looked like it had been growing for months, but he kept that thought to himself. The ranger was getting used to Li Wei's oddities. He glanced at the tidy man and the horse and asked, "Bad time to visit? You heading out?" "Yes, I'm planning to go see Rivendell." "Rivendell?" Falodon nodded. "I know the place. There's a small path through the wilderness that leads in. Don't get lost." With the ranger's tip about the shortcut in mind, Li Wei mounted and prepared to ride east. "Thanks. But speaking of which, do you have any urgent business this time? Want to stay a few more days? I've been experimenting with a lot of new recipes lately." "There's no need to stay, but I do have something to tell you." Li Wei, since that cavalry squad was wiped out, the Orc King of the Misty Mountains already knows you exist. He'll probably retaliate. Be careful when you travel. The Orc King. Li Wei first thought of Azog, then realized Azog wasn't usually called that. He pictured instead some bloated, towering orc, an Orc King who lived in a cave. "I understand. Thanks for the warning." Rangers came and went like wind. No matter how often Li Wei invited Falodon to stay, the ranger wouldn't. Falodon inspected the new territory with him, showing off the iron golems, which stared blankly at the ranger until one awkwardly scratched its head, produced a little red flower from who knew where, and offered it politely. The golem showed no sign of hostility. Its friend or foe recognition clearly worked. Falodon accepted the flower with a polite thank you and didn't linger. Soon he was gone. Li Wei mounted his horse and rode east along the main road. Having a horse made travel drastically faster. The animal's top speed was only 11.5 miles per second, but it could run continuously and didn't need rest. One man and one horse at full gallop could cover incredible distance. By dusk, he reached a landmark at pace, Last Bridge. He slowed at the river, led the horse across the stone steps, and watched the sunset set the water alight. This was the place. Troll Forest. He checked his map. A short walk northeast from the bridge took you into the dangerous Troll Forest, a place thick with ogres from the eastern Ettenmoors and the Misty Mountains. More than 3 ogres lived here. He wasn't sure where the trio that would later capture Bilbo might be, but he was curious anyway. If he found them, great. If not, it would still be a decent tour. The scenery wasn't particularly inviting, but he'd made up his mind. Li Wei dug a deep pit beside the bridge, led the horse down into it, and sealed the top. Because he'd spent the last 2 days riding, his food reserves were hardly touched. He had plenty to spare. Confident his mount was safe, he strode northeast into the forest. Night fell fast. A cool breeze brushed his face, but it didn't bother him. He crept through the undergrowth, overturning a bush to reveal a terrified wild rabbit. Another disappointment. Half the night passed with nothing but small game. If anyone had seen him, they'd think he'd lost his mind. Most people avoided monsters, yet he actively sought them and found none. Were they all hiding because they knew he was coming? A sudden rustle behind him ended the thought. A dark shape exploded out of a bush and lunged, knife raised, aiming straight for him. Aha! Look what I... Li Wei drew his longsword in a fraction of a second and sliced backward. The attacker bit the dust in an instant. An orc. He froze for a moment. One orc meant more were likely nearby, but the immediate threat was down. At least it hadn't had time to raise an alarm. Then the forest answered with howls, wargs screaming from all sides. Li Wei's hair prickled. He snapped his backpack open and, with practiced speed, pulled on his armor. The undergrowth erupted. Wargs hurled themselves at him, fangs bared. The lead beast launched itself to clamp on his torso. An iron-rimmed wooden buckler slammed forward. The first warg met the shield dead on and reeled, dazed from the impact. Li Wei followed through with a crushing sword blow to the head. The beast howled and collapsed, grievously wounded. More wargs poured out like a tide. Shield up, he fought, step by step, parrying and retreating as the pack circled. 7, 8 wargs came at him from all sides. The shield held, its durability intact, and their bites barely grazed him. He moved with speed and precision, finishing downed wolves while guarding against the next lunge. On one turn, he deflected a bite and slashed another warg down so quickly it couldn't dodge. But combat had its moments of danger. In the instant he twisted to strike, another warg slipped in behind him and clamped down on his waist. It felt like a needle prick, painful but shallow. He was hit in a heavily armored spot. He cursed the lapse. Wargs attacked in packs and timed their strikes to exploit any opening. While he fended off the beasts, an arrow suddenly whistled from a rock above. It thunked against his helmet with a jarring shock. An orc archer loomed over the fight, wearing a feral grin as the shaft embedded itself in the metal. A perfect shot, headshot, if not for the helmet. The arrow did serious damage. Without the iron helm, it would have cost him dearly. But Li Wei had a trick of his own. He tore the bloody shaft free from his head, stared up at the archer, and ignored the taunts. Pulling a strip of dried beef from a pouch, he sank his teeth into it. As he chewed, his vitality visibly steadied, his wounds closed, his strength returning. The food sated him and replenished his health. The archer tried to take another shot, but Li Wei's shield blocked every angle. The ranger would sooner be bitten alive than let an arrow fly true. A pile of warg corpses marked his path as he advanced. Li Wei stepped over them and closed on the archer's perch. With one clean, brutal stroke, he severed the archer's head. The forest fell silent, except for the wind. Chapter 20, The Ogre. Who? After the fight, Li Wei didn't linger. He collected the spoils and left, except for one item that caught his eye, an unfamiliar bow with a distinctive design. Orc bow, range damage plus 10%, attack range plus 10%. It had special attributes. The last time he'd seen anything like that was the dagger from the fractional merchant. Li Wei held the bow up and examined it. Compared to the crude wooden bows he could make himself, the materials here were clearly superior. The bowstring felt almost metallic, excellent craftsmanship. He had to admit, these orcs had some good gear. He picked up an arrow from the ground and drew the string. It was the first time Li Wei had ever used a bow, partly because he'd never found decent string to make one, and partly because he preferred close combat. He'd never bothered to learn archery. The orc squad he'd ambushed earlier had a lot of archers, but his TNT had torn them apart. There was nothing left intact. Still, when he released the arrow, now it sailed true and buried itself in a tree trunk. The feel was surprisingly good. With the system's assistance, the threshold for archery was low. When he drew the bow, his stance was basically correct, so he didn't have the awkwardness of a novice. After a few shots, Li Wei got used to it. The system could always take over or let him control things manually, but he wouldn't interrupt the assist until he really mastered the skill. The orc archer hadn't carried many arrows. After retrieving what had been shot, he only had 9 left. Ammunition was scarce. It was late. Li Wei found a random cave, lit a small bonfire, and roasted an ear of corn over a stick. He could have eaten dried meat and been full, but life needed a little ritual. The corn steamed and browned, giving off a sweet, starchy smell. He bit in, sweet, soft, and pleasantly sticky. Delicious. Thud. A tremor ran through the ground. Li Wei instinctively looked toward it. Under the firelight, a huge shadow loomed and slowly approached. He put down his corn. Thump, thump. As it drew nearer, the silhouette revealed its great height. Then the massive head and shoulders came into view, and a crude voice rumbled. Food. Eating food. Li Wei finally saw it clearly. An ogre. It sniffed, then grinned. Aha! Look what I've found! Meat delivered right to my home. Li Wei couldn't help himself. He jumped up too. Aha! Look what I've found! An ogre! The ogre blinked, utterly confused. How could its prey be so cheerful about being dinner? In the next breath, the human in front of it seemed to blur into something else, armor gleaming on his body and a longsword magnified in the ogre's stunned pupils. Ah! The ogre clapped one massive hand over an eye and staggered back 2 steps. It lashed out with a casual kick, sending a spray of loose rock toward Li Wei. He had to raise his shield to block and was forced to retreat under the impact. Good heavens, the last slash let Li Wei glimpse the ogre's status bar. 5360. The ogre's max health was 60, and because of its thick hide, it had 2 armor bars as well. Overall, it had more vitality than a zombie. Bug, I'm gonna kill you, the ogre roared, and slapping the ground, it lunged at him. It knocked over the bonfire and charged. Li Wei narrowly dodged, then countered with a sword strike. The ogre reacted, hauling a punch up toward his waist. With room to maneuver cut off, Li Wei had to raise his shield. Clang! The blow was blocked, but the impact cracked the shield with a resounding crunch. He watched helplessly as his offhand slot showed a cooldown bar. His shield was shattered and unusable for a short time. That hit had hurt. He took damage. 9-3. A frontal brawl was impossible. With his shield broken, Li Wei took one more blow and bolted out of the cave. He pulled out a pile of cobblestones, circled around, and started stacking them at the entrance, slamming them into place as fast as he could. Damn it! The ogre threw itself against the makeshift wall. Its strength rattled the stones and hairline cracks spidered outward. Li Wei slipped an arrow from his quiver, knocked it, and fired through a small gap. Whoosh! Ah! The ogre screamed. The arrow had found its mark. It struck the neck and dealt 8 points of damage. Realizing it was wounded, the ogre pressed one massive hand to its head and eyes, abandoning smashing the wall for the moment. But once Li Wei sealed the cave with the cobblestones, the ogre's fate was set. Have you ever heard the legend of the despicable block man? He muttered, half to himself. Inside, the ogre thudded and roared as Li Wei kept shooting arrows through the hole. One after another struck, 7 or 8 arrows finding flesh before the creature collapsed with a final, crashing thud. It never managed to break through the suddenly appearing stone barrier. After its health hit 0, Li Wei approached the entrance cautiously. Up close, the cobblestone wall was indeed thick, nearly a meter, and it had almost been smashed through. This ogre was stronger than he'd expected. Next time he'd use 2 layers. The corpse yielded nothing special. Its bones were the most valuable thing, good for fertilizer. The meat was likely unpalatable. Li Wei's personal minimum for eating was already crude, warg meat, and even that wasn't great. A quick search turned up nothing else, and Li Wei nearly shrugged, thinking the place was a bust. Then he remembered the ogre's cave had been its home. That renewed his interest. Homes sometimes hid treasures. He grabbed a torch and stepped carefully inside. The interior stank of filth and dry bones. It was a squalid nest. He almost turned to leave, but the torchlight flickered and caught on something in the deepest corner, something that glinted as the flames swayed.